this segment is, very poor, especially in this country. I think that also serves as a disincentive. The question is, we also have very high unemployment by tertiary education in the US. Any explanations that we can, we have been looking for literature, so any explanations that are here? It has been 40% plus for the past 1 decade, 96 to 2005, the data that we have. So unemployed by tertiary education has been very high in the US. Any explanations for that?
So let me turn it back to the panel. Who would like to answer?
Very brief answer to the question on the specific skills and high risk of unemployment. This is in a way a typical German observation because our vocational training system has been developed in such a differentiated way with more than 360 occupations which are very specialized. And in addition, the specialization is very much in terms of firm-specific specialization. This may create a high risk of unemployment if the firm gets bankrupt or if this kind of sectoral employment is going to be reduced, for instance in the textile industry or things like that. So the more you specialize, even if it's highly specialized and high educated and high skilled, the risk of unemployment may become high due to structural change. And so if India wants to learn about the dual training systems, especially apprenticeship systems, I would recommend even to look more on Austria and Switzerland, which have provide a more smooth area between academic education and apprenticeship systems, where especially apprenticeships you can also get a degree for the universities to enter later on the university. So this would be, in my view, a better model.
Neil, do you have any last words you would like to say?
This last comment, did I understand correctly? You're saying that unemployment rates amongst tertiary educated graduates in the United States is 40%? Oh, okay. Oh, that's quite a different thing. Yeah, but in general, there are very high potential returns to tertiary education in the United States. So I suppose the unemployment comes from. But I did want to say a point about educated unemployment in general. Unemployment, youth unemployment, or youngish person unemployment in lower income countries is heavily concentrated amongst the more educated, and that's basically an income-related thing. Education is correlated, broadly speaking, education is correlated with income. So if I have a higher family income, household background income, then I can afford to be unemployed. And that's the basic explanation, not the whole explanation. You find a similar pattern also in southern Italy, but which is less. When you're in a system where you don't have social assistance, then family income becomes the determinant of whether you can afford or not to be unemployed. Whether or not this makes it a real problem, more educated young people tend to be more active about complaining about unemployment, so it can make it more a political issue as well. But there is an issue whether unemployment is really the problem. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Neil. Would anybody on my left like to make any last comments?
I think the last comment that he made, what happened to United States is exactly, as I said in my comments, is happening in India. 30% of all unemployed are graduate and above. But this is nothing to belittle the dimension of the problem of those people who are not educated. Their problem is not reflected in unemployment rate. That is reflected in poverty rate. Just according to one estimate, which we have done, if you see the poverty rate among workers in India, people who are employed, something like at $2 purchasing power parity, something like 55% of them are poor. So low productivity of poor people is a different dimension, which unemployment statistics India does not capture. For that, we need a different kind of discussion. But for this youth unemployment, which I said, now increasingly unemployment is becoming towards educated youth, what had happened to United States. Just one question on caste. I think on average level, most of the lower caste scheduled tribes are employed in lower occupations. But we have just done analysis, and which reflects that there has been massive decline of upper caste and other better off groups in good employment, and which has been taken over by OBC between 99, 2000 and 2011, something like 10% decline. So this kind of dynamism which is taking place, change, not at average level. It needs to be an intra-group inequality in all groups, particularly the better off groups, is quite huge.
So let me end first of all by thanking very much our panelists for their very interesting insights on youth unemployment. Let me say a few final words. I think what that's come out of this session is very clear, that issues of improving youth labour market prospects go beyond, well beyond youth unemployment. In India, as in other countries, it's not just about getting unemployed youth into jobs, it's about the job quality itself and improving job quality and job opportunities for youth. And that requires several different things. First of all, it requires creating better job qualities more generally, and that's about sort of more inclusive, stronger, job-rich growth. That's a key challenge for India and a key challenge for most other countries. The second issue is that you need a combination of policies. I think that's come out very clearly. Education is clearly the number one sort of challenge for India, as it is for other countries. That means better basic education, but it means also building up a strong vocational education and training system alongside a stronger university system, and ensuring that the skills coming out of that system are the skills needed in the labour market, but also working on the side of employers as well, trying to get them to upskill as well. So not just upskilling young people, but upskilling the skill demands coming from employers. That's a huge challenge for India. To create those higher productive and higher wage paying jobs is clearly important. And lastly, you need to look at the labour market side and sort of ensure that your institutions are working towards and fostering greater job creation and not reducing job opportunities or restricting young people into certain segments of the labour market. So thank you very much, and I hope you'll have a couple of minutes for coffee.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the penultimate session for the day, which is on green growth, green jobs and skills. Coming soon after the discussion on the need for creating jobs in a country like India, some would argue that we should focus on jobs rather than green jobs, and then worry about green jobs later. However, there could be a view, and I hope the panel would discuss this, that it's possible that green jobs and growth could possibly go together, and that we could, over time, be a net creator of green jobs, which will probably be important for countries like India. Given what is happening around us on the environment, and all of us read the nature and the quality of air in Delhi and the kind of health impacts it's having, I think this is something that should come onto the agenda, if not now, at least very, very soon. We have an eminent panel before us. There's been a couple of casualties in this panel, perhaps more than a couple of casualties in this panel. Hence you find me here and not Dilip Chenoy. And Pramod Bhasin, who was to be one of the discussants, all of us know Pramod Bhasin, he's also had to cry off because of a medical problem. And then I've just learned that Ritu Mathur is unable to make it, and Saptarishi Das, also from the same institute, Terry, is going to substitute for her, and ably, I may add. The panel, I won't read out the entire bios they're in the booklet. We have Dr. Alex Brown, Principal Research Fellow, Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and Environment, London School of Economics, who will start, who will be followed by Dr. Vinod Kumar Sharma, and then finally I will hand over to Saptarishi Das to conclude the initial remarks, and then we'll of course engage in a discussion. Since the discussant is not here, we will be able to engage more with the audience. So without further ado, may I request Dr. Alex Brown to make his presentation. And we have an extended time, so you may take up to 15 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kathuria, and thank you to ICRIER and World Bank for inviting me here. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to talk about green growth and labour markets. My own background is, at the moment I'm studying climate change economics at the Grantham Research Institute at LSE, but my first interest was in labour economics, and it's very interesting to see how these two areas of study come together. It might be useful, starting out this session, just to rehearse what green growth and green jobs are about. Green growth, as I see it, is essentially about sustainable development. But then you might ask, why does one need a different term? Now the cynical answer to that, I think, is if sustainable development didn't win sufficient policy support, let's try something else. But actually, I think there's more to it than that. As the World Bank has put it, inclusive green growth aims to operationalize sustainable development by essentially trying to reconcile developing countries' urgent need for rapid growth and poverty alleviation with the need to avoid irreversible and costly environmental damage. So it's partly to do with the fact that there is more confidence that growth will help reduce poverty. It's partly in the developed world because growth has suffered a serious slowdown, and it's partly because I think going green has got a greater political salience as a result of debates about climate change in particular. But green growth requires that governments around the world impose strong environmental policies. And whether green growth ends up being inclusive or not depends to a very large extent on how those policies play out in labour markets. And I want to highlight in my presentation very briefly some of the labour market opportunities and indeed challenges posed by the transition to green growth. Let's start with the opportunities, a very simple list that I think covers most of the issues. Some of the consequences of going green I think could be very helpful. First of all, there's an opportunity to create good quality jobs in producing environmental goods and services, green jobs. But it goes beyond that. Second, in some areas of the economy, low carbon technologies appear to be more labour intensive. So a general switch to more labour intensive technologies and processes may help to stimulate labour demand. Third, going green, particularly changing the energy systems around the world to be low carbon, entail a great deal more investment in energy systems, and that means more aggregate demand. So if there's an inadequate amount of aggregate demand, as there certainly is in many developing as well as developed countries, going green could provide that and generate more jobs. Fourth, going green entails switching technologies. And indeed, in the area of climate change, we don't really have all the technologies that we need, like carbon capture and storage or advanced biofuels that we can expand at scale. We need more innovation to do that. That innovation is going to require better national innovation systems. If we can provide those better national innovation systems, we can stimulate technological progress and growth across economies as a whole, not just for environmental goods and services. And finally, we've got to remember what the point is of going green in the first place. There are very big benefits, co-benefits, which the recent report presented at the UN conference in New York emphasized, the New Climate Economy project. There are co-benefits, especially better health, which could have immediate benefits to the labour market through improved labour supply, reduced ill health. But more than that, if one can halt human-induced climate change, that's going to produce huge benefits in the future in the way of higher living standards, lower risks of starvation, of collapse of agricultural systems, and large-scale migration. Now, let's unpack this a little bit. What about this opportunity, these opportunities for job creation? Well, statisticians are developing a standard for counting green jobs. There seems to be an agreement focusing on the idea of measuring the workforce involved in producing environmental goods and services. This slide here shows how this category of jobs has been increasing in the European Union since the turn of the millennium. And it shows quite a considerable increase, something which has attracted attention, has provided powerful ammunition to the green lobbies in Europe. Very substantial increase in green employment. But we've got to keep this in perspective. In advanced industrial countries, employment in this area is probably of the order of 2% of the workforce, a little more in some of the front runners, probably quite a bit less in most of the developing world. We don't have very good measures at the moment. In the developed countries, the US and the UK are examples of countries who have started to collect statistics in this area and have stepped back, at least for a while. But it does seem that there are growth opportunities. In the case in this slide, you can see that in Europe, it's the management of energy resources, particularly the growth of renewable energy, which has been the centre of jobs growth. However, there's a great deal of uncertainty about how many jobs are created by green growth policies. And I want to illustrate two of those aspects of uncertainty. First is it matters what green spending's on. Let's mention first the question of energy and the question of technologies. This chart shows the job years created by building a gigawatt hour of energy capacity in different technologies, either producing energy or saving energy. So you can see along the bottom, the slide runs from biomass through geothermal, through nuclear, to wind energy on the right-hand side. And the point of this chart is to show that renewable technologies, in particular improving energy efficiency and installing solar PV panels, are both more labour intensive than traditional fossil fuel sources of energy. You can see 3 in from the left. Coal is rather low in terms of job years per gigawatt hour, and you can see in the middle natural gas similarly is rather low. So in the energy sector, going green holds out the prospect of producing demand for more job years, which on the face of it sounds attractive. 2 problems with this. First, the inverse of job years per gigawatt hour is a measure of labour productivity. So there's a question about whether one wants to switch economies into lower productivity forms of energy supply. And indeed, the emphasis in practice in countries expanding their renewable energy supply has been on getting down unit costs, and that includes the costs of labour. So I think one's got to be a little bit careful about measures like this which focus on job years per unit of energy capacity rather than job years per dollar or rupee spent. The second thing is that energy supply is capital intensive, whichever technology you choose. And so if your focus is on job creation alone, then this slide really is not the most relevant to look at. The second aspect of uncertainty reflects the lack of real solid ex post research on what has been going on in the energy transition in those countries which have started down that path. And this chart is taken from a publication by Terry and shows 3 different projections of the employment potential for a high growth scenario for wind energy in India. And this is absolutely no criticism of the 3 institutes who provided these projections. They use different assumptions and different databases, but policymakers need to have someone to project what's going to happen as a result of their policies. Unfortunately, because there's so little track record in this area, these 3 forecasts for the employment potential in India are very different indeed, orders of magnitude different. And this is not unusual. If you look at estimates for the impact of wind power on jobs in Europe, you see quite a wide variation as well. And a lot of estimates are based on engineering studies, essentially sort of projections of what has been observed in the laboratory rather than ex post estimates based on actual experience. So we need to know a lot more before we can be really confident about the scope for green jobs in the energy transition. Now, it matters also which part of the transition to green growth one's talking about. This chart, again, it was a forward-looking projection. It's not based on ex post results. But the Republic of Korea engaged in quite a strong green fiscal stimulus in the immediate aftermath of the global financial and economic crisis in 2008, and emphasized the green aspects of their efforts. It's probably the fiscal stimulus with the largest proportion devoted to explicitly environmental objectives around the world. Now, it's possible to calculate estimates of the employment increase per billion US dollars spent on different aspects of environmental improvements. Running here, as you can see, from mass transit improvements at the top down to providing information about green production options and consumption options at the bottom. And what I wanted to emphasize here was the variety in estimates in the right-hand column of this estimate of future employment increases. Now, I mentioned earlier clean energy. There's a category here, vehicles and clean energy, three lines down. that actually provides the fewest number of jobs per US $1 billion spent, 9,600. In contrast, forest restoration is much more labour intensive. River restoration is fairly labour intensive. Energy conservation, carried out largely in the construction sector, 2 down, is also very labour intensive. So if a country is trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve the environment and create jobs, then it's not so much the energy system as energy conservation and changes in land use which are the sectors with most potential. This is likely to vary across countries. It's also not clear that these numbers would hold for non-marginal changes in spending, but I think it gives you a good guide to the need to unpack fiscal stimuli. But there are challenges as well as opportunities, and this is where I go beyond the title of the session, Green Jobs and Skills, and talk about brown jobs and other jobs that are neither green nor brown. Brown jobs, jobs in the fossil fuel sector, for instance, in the provision of dirty energy, brown jobs in using up renewable resources like tropical forests. We have to concern ourselves with the employment opportunities of people who might be displaced from these brown jobs by green growth policies. Second, there's scope for higher production costs from the transition to green growth, most obviously higher energy costs, not just through carbon pricing, which I would advocate strongly as part of the green growth package, but also simply by reducing existing subsidies to fossil fuels. There's a problem with potentially lower real wages because given monetary wage doesn't go as far if the price of currently carbon intensive goods and services is being pushed up by green growth policies. Fourth, there's a problem of structural adjustment and skill bottlenecks, as there would be with any large structural change in the economy. In this case, one deliberately induced by government policy. And finally, if the outcomes for labour markets of a transition to green growth are to be positive, one needs good government and well-designed, credible policies for the environment, for skill development, innovation and fairness over the long haul, over a long time horizon. Without those, there's a danger that measures such as carbon pricing and removing fossil fuel subsidies are not going to create employment, rather help to create uncertainty and reduce demand from workers adversely affected by price increases. Now, actually, the issue about brown jobs, I think, can be overemphasized. The evidence suggests that brown jobs are highly concentrated. This chart is for 25 countries of the European Union. And what it does is it ranks along the bottom different industrial sectors from air transport on the left to financial intermediaries and post and telecommunications on the right. Basically, the idea here is to go from the most carbon intensive sector to the least carbon intensive sector. And if one accumulates the carbon emissions from these sectors, you get the red line. Okay, so you add sector after sector and you account for more and more of the carbon emissions in those countries. You can do the same thing for the amount of employment that these countries account for. And basically that leads you to the discovery that about 90% of the carbon emissions in these countries come from industries that only account for 10% of the labour force. So if one concentrates one's green growth policies on, or particular climate change mitigation policies, on dealing with the industries on the left, one might have quite a substantial impact on their output, but the impact on jobs in the economy as a whole may be quite limited. And one also knows where to look for the problem. But we have to worry about more than brown jobs. We've got to worry about jobs which are neither green nor brown. This chart I find helpful, but it's got to be regarded carefully. It's one from the International Labour Statisticians who are trying to develop statistical standards for measuring green jobs. And they focus on that part of total employment involved in the production of environmental outputs, Circle A, and environmental processes, Circle B. They remind us that the ILO insists that green jobs should also be decent jobs. So essentially one wants to increase the number of jobs in the intersection of Circle C with Circle A and B. And I think that's quite helpful to help categorize jobs. But there's this little circle down the bottom, jobs in non-environmental sectors created thanks to going green. The fact of the matter is we don't really know how big that circle ought to be. And in fact, as I illustrated with the example of brown jobs, there could actually be a negative impact in jobs outside environmental goods and services. And that's where we need, I think, a lot more research. There's a tendency, certainly amongst political leaders introducing green policies, understandably to justify them in terms of the green jobs created. And there's rather less emphasis on what might be the ramifications in the rest of the economy. And the problems here, I think, can be illustrated both by focusing on the energy system, which is the focus of a lot of work on renewable energy, and by looking at models of the economy as a whole. This chart's taken from Greenpeace International's supported study for South Africa, looking at the scope for South Africa to switch from heavy reliance on fossil fuels to renewable energy. So we have on the left for 3 different years projections for jobs in the energy sector under a reference scenario. In the middle we've got 3 years for a scenario which the authors call the energy revolution, and then on the right hand side we have job projections for an advanced energy revolution. Now, the key points to make here are the energy revolution ends up killing more brown jobs than it creates green jobs. You can see in particular there are big falls in the dark blue bit of the bar, which is jobs in the coal sector, coal mining. There's an expansion in a range of renewable energies, but not enough to make up for the transition. And this clearly poses a problem for labour markets and a big political problem for anybody advocating going green in South Africa. Now, the advanced energy revolution says essentially South Africa has a decent manufacturing base and could become the source of exports of solar PV panels to the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. If it can do that, it can increase employment. And I think the authors make a plausible argument that for South Africa that is a reasonable strategy. And that creates jobs. The question is, for what sort of country is this aspect of the green transition open. I think it probably is open for South Africa. It's probably open for India. It's been open for China. It's not clear to me that it's open for many of the least developed countries without a manufacturing base. Let's now look at this question in a wider context, looking at what might happen across economies as a whole. This is a chart from an OECD publication that looks at what the impact of a low carbon future would be on jobs in different sectors compared with a business as usual case. And you can see here that gas, coal and fossil fuel based electricity on the left see very substantial changes in employment represented by the grey bar. On the right hand side, solar and wind electricity, nuclear power, combustible renewables and waste electricity, transport services, all of those can grow. So it's the story I've already laid out. Lose brown jobs, gain green jobs. In this diagram, it doesn't look as if much is going on in the middle. For other industries, there's not a very big change proportionally in their employment. But that's partly because they're much bigger industries. So let's have a look at a different way of presenting similar figures. Let's look at the impact of a low carbon future, reducing emissions, on the sectoral composition of total production. So now the scale on the left hand side is the proportion of the total labour force that's affected, not the size of the labour force just in the industry in which you're focusing. Concentrate here on the light blue bars. That's where the European Union and developing countries both take urgent action on reducing emissions from 2020. The point here is, in terms of the number of jobs created in both the EU and China as a large emerging market, the big opportunities are in the services sector, neither green nor brown. And it's very important to take into account these economy-wide ramifications of what's going on. Sorry, before I leave that slide, I just wanted to say that this is, if one thinks of the transition to green growth in a broader sense, not just stopping human-induced climate change, but generally putting more emphasis on the role of ideas and knowledge in the economy, less emphasis on the material throughput of energy and non-renewable resources, then we can expect to see economies move towards sectors like business services, transport services, education and so forth. It's very striking that in the preliminary estimates that the US Bureau of Labor Statistics came up for green jobs by industry, education and financial services had virtually no green jobs. And yet those are sectors which I would argue one would like to see grow in a green economy. So I think it's a big mistake to get fixated on counting green jobs when one's thinking about the impact of green growth on labour markets. Given the time, I'll pass through one slide and just mention something about skill shortages and retraining. We've heard a great deal already in the context of youth unemployment about the need for training, a bridge from education to the labour market. Those challenges exist for green growth as with other structural changes. I don't think that they are insurmountable. There are some new technologies involved which require, of course, very specific training. Structural change always requires retraining. I think there is a big problem about the specific skills for the fossil fuel sector. Typically in developed countries, mine workers had quite high wages for manual labourers, and understandably feel that the implicit contract between them and their employers has been violated in the rundown of the coal sector. And I think, well, I'd be very interested to hear from our Polish colleague what the perspective is from Poland in that regard. I wanted to emphasise two other aspects of this challenge for labour markets. Going green is going to require a lot of strategic planning. It's going to require a lot of good project management. There's a well-known case where the Australian government tried to roll out roof insulation at very high speed and found that they neither had the enough skilled construction people on the ground to do this, but more important, nor did they have someone who could actually run the projects at scale. And they ran into a great deal of trouble, which also had the unfortunate consequence of putting a lot of Australian voters off the idea of going green if it affected their own safety in their own homes. But my last point here on this slide is that green growth ultimately requires a shift from reliance on materials and on energy towards ideas. So I think the big challenge for labour markets in going green is the one that was mentioned earlier in a completely different context, basically improving foundation of general education and general skill acquisition and developing social contracts so that structural change can be achieved with less disruption in the labour market. I think given the time, I'll sum up by going to my last slide and recap that there are great opportunities from the transition to green growth, from increase in some sectors in labour intensity, from increasing aggregate demand, where I think there's considerable scope not only in those countries with high measured unemployment, but in economies like India with a lot of low productivity employment. There are great opportunities from higher rates of innovation and from improved health. But one has to think about how to mitigate the impact of higher costs and prices. One way of doing that is to use active labour market and skills policies. One needs policies to ensure fairness, and I think given that energy tends to be a larger proportion of the household budget for poor families, it's essential that if we have carbon pricing and reduce fossil fuel subsidies, that we increase cash transfers to poor families. And finally, echoing the point I made earlier, we need good government that will introduce credible long-term policy frameworks, not just for going green, but to ensure that labour markets work effectively. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Alex Bone. I think your last slide summed it up very well. In fact, as we move to a lower proportion of services in India and greater proportion of manufacturing, some of these trade-offs are going to be real and tangible, and the cost-benefit analysis of going the business as usual route will have to be done. I don't think much of this has been done in relations to jobs yet, but I would let Saptareshi Das, who will speak on this, tell us what has been done in this regard. But before Saptareshi, may I request, and we are now running out of time, so I'm not going to be as flexible as I was. Could I request you to speak for about, let's say, 15 minutes? Dr. Sharma from Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research in Mumbai. Dr. Sharma is a professor and in an advanced research institute established and governed, for those who do not know, by the Reserve Bank of India, the central bank, and chairs its board of management. The University Grants Commission of India recognizes the institute as a deemed university. Professor Sharma has been a member of the board of management and dean of IGIDR. Dr. Sharma.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, I've been given 15 minutes. I'll try to sum up earlier if possible. So, I'll start where Alex started. What are the green jobs? It has become a fashion to paint the things in green. You will find clean and green daily slogan is there. Even our chairs are green, which are less deployed. I could say that unemployment rate for these chairs in this session is very high. It's a joke. So, painting green is not the green job. You just saw Alex was speaking of brown, blue, and even colorless, nuclear radiation, and many more. So this is the slide which is a practical case study. I will not go into, initially when you gave me invitation 6 months in June, I thought I'll do a exhaustive short analysis of this. But that I thought I was confident I will be able to finish within 15 days, I could not do it. But short analysis of green jobs, I'll give you in 4 lines. I can finish there also, but I'll just share some of my practical experience of working in more than 30 years in this area. Short analysis, strength, weakness, opportunity, threat for green jobs. 4 lines I will speak. Strength is, many of you might have heard from many excellent speakers since morning, we have a large workforce will be emerging in future. And still we have large workforce. So that is the strength, can we divert some of these workforce to the green jobs. Weakness is, do we have enough teachers and trainers who can rightly train the people to do the green jobs. Opportunity, we have spoken for 30 years, academicians have spoken, policymakers have spoken, now the Prime Minister is speaking. Clean India, Swachh Bharat, Ganga Action Plan was working for the last 20 years. I did some water quality modeling in Ganga Action Plan long ago. River linking project. Digital India even. All these create a lot of opportunity for the green jobs. And threat is, if you don't train the people in right direction, they will be grabbed by somebody else. So my presentation can be over here. Let me give you some of the things. If you want, you can stop me anytime and people can discuss. So this is one of the practical example of biodiesel production, which case study I was leading. It was multi-country studies in 16 countries in Asia, and India was one of the countries I was leading in Andhra Pradesh. And this is the actual, this is a small, very, very micro scale study in which employment is one of the factors. Because what we did was, we tried to do life cycle assessment of biodiesel production process. So life cycle assessment, who know, it is the basically, is try to find out social, environmental, as well as economic aspect. That is what you call practical definition of sustainability. Theoretical definition is very high. Brundtland report says that your future generation should get something and present generation do something like that, something. These are theoretical definitions. Practical definition of sustainability is that your economic, social, and environmental aspects should be taken care of. On these aspects, of course, you have to have the trade-off. Somewhere policymakers may need environmental weightage to environmental aspect will be more, somewhere economic aspect will be more, somewhere social aspect will be more. So we did LCA of biodiesel production process, and the employment was social, economic, and environmental analysis, in which employment and income generation was part of social and economic, socio-economic, you can say. So green jobs mainly refer to what Alex has said already, sustainable development job, or if you pinpoint, focus on energy and environmental related job. Because when you integrate environmental dimension into development process, you call it green growth. But it is easy to talk in the area of environment. It is very difficult to get expertise into this area. You need, in many directions you have to work, social, economic, environmental, management, and policy aspect you have to learn, particularly at high level. And as I said, I only did a short analysis, so this thing basically covering that. So I will not waste time on that. You can read that. 30 years ago, when one of my teachers said that if you want to progress faster in your career, I was civil engineer, and from civil engineering I did master's in environmental engineering. Very few people know that civil engineering is offering environment subjects since ages. Water supply, sanitation, water work, this comes from that discipline. And they offer master's level environmental engineering after a bachelor's degree. And he was right. Of course, other side, there was another teacher of mine. when I did PhD from IIT Bombay in air pollution, air quality modeling, very complex process, air quality modeling. Terry has used that, my book in Sustainability Index, Development Sustainability Index, aerosol quality modeling. So there are negative side of teacher. He said, you are doing PhD in air pollution, and that aerosol modeling, what it is? Sir, it's very upcoming area. लेकिन अभी तो नहीं है ना कुछ भी, upcoming है कब आएगा? So in future it will be there. You open the pan shop, there nobody to eat. पान लेने के लिए, खाने के लिए कोई नहीं, तो क्यों पान की दुकान खोलने का? So you have both types of things. One teacher said, if you want to be leader in this area, and in fact in academic, I have not been political. In academic, I have been very fast. If I have been civil engineer, all the things career would have not been so fast as it has been in environmental engineering area. So those are the, I'm talking about the strength of this area. Let me come to environment, some basic things. We write clean and green, Delhi, Chakachak, Mumbai. This is the slogans, all BMC and local authority policy makers. This is the Chakachak Mumbai you see here. If you can read here, I'll just briefly I'll explain. This is the latest picture of near my institute, near Film City in Goregaon, Mumbai, outside my institute. And this is the photo which I took in 1994 when I was visiting German Development Institute in Frankfurt. That time I took this photograph. It's a busy street photograph. It's not that I have taken in the night. So you can see in 20 years, this is the Chakachak Mumbai. And that's why people say there's lack of fun. Mumbai Municipal Corporation is one of the richest corporations in the country. Its budget is, I think, more than some of the states of the country. Some of the small states don't have even that much budget. And 5 to 25% is the average for last 20 years what they spent on solid waste management. Despite that, our situation is so bad that dog is there, rules are there. You should not walk on you should not throw this garbage. But dog does not represent the environmental policy or environmental law. It will come if it is spread there. So you can see this is the situation. Now, role of environmental education, I need to stress on that. Everybody, all of us have got the job according to qualification upon capability. It's not necessarily, when I say qualification, it's not necessarily formal education, it could be informal education, it could be experience. But certainly it is one form of education. So there is a strong link. Unless you improve, I said, opportunity will be grabbed by somebody. Bullet train will be by Japan, somebody will do, PwC will be here, Ernst & Young will be here, who will give up their jobs. So potential are that they have been in demand. I am an example of demand 30 years ago. And I also did one market job analysis in 92 about what is the job market. Even that time environment job was very high, now it's much, much higher on future process. So they will be always in demand. We don't have people. In fact, it's just opposite. What people are saying that jobs are not there, jobs are there, people are not available. They cannot do. If a PhD person from some XY university in last 20 years, 30 years, I am trying to get some good research assistant, research fellow, we are ready to pay even amount what they want. It's not necessary that we just want to pay 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 1 lakh rupees. We are not getting the right person to do the analysis what we want. So that's the biggest problem. And they are grabbed by multinationals, international agencies, who are the experts. It's not that they are not very few. So we have to grow number of those experts. Unskilled jobs, skilled jobs, unskilled jobs are there, but skilled and expert people are not available. Unskilled job can be taught. I mean, they are not that difficult. This is some estimations have been given by ARENA and Planning Commission, one working group, and then I'll show you. This is the ARENA says that 2013, all over the world, India was the 4th in producing or creating renewable energy jobs. So energy and environment sector both I'm covering, and these are the different sectors of renewable energy. This is the percentage for India in, again, renewable energy. Now come to that study, that green first figure which you saw first page. This is the analysis which we have carried out. I mean, this is much more complex analysis. I have just taken an employment figure in that. That when one company comes, goes there, buy a land of almost 100 acres for 20 lakhs rupees, and within 5 years, the land becomes 20 crore. So company is also gaining. They go to Jastrofa. From Jatrofa, they are distributing all over the villages nearby because there is no system from the government how to buy. And this Jatrofa biodiesel story going on for last many years. 2003 we planned that, 2007, 2008 we'll have 5%, 10%. Still we are not able to get 5%, 10% blending. We postponed it to 2012. Now we have postponed to 2017. So, but private companies are doing, they are surviving. So this is the employment rate in Jatrofa. LCA, when I say life cycle, so we convert it to Jatrofa cultivation stage and biodiesel production stage. We do not go consumption stage because that is not formal. So this is the job creation in cultivation job. And cultivation job, anybody can do. Agriculture job, you don't need much more qualification in that. Of course, certain where experts are available where they will tell you how to grow it, and then you can do it. Most of them are physical jobs. And advantage of that employment was that when they were families who were working here, per person the income increased from 2,500. They were employed elsewhere. They got 4,000 rupees per month. So their living standard has also increased because of the employment. And this is the employment converted into percentage per hectare and per year. 248 in Jatrofa cultivation. This is the biodiesel production stage. Now you see that this is industry and this is agriculture activity. This is the industry where they are converting seeds into the biodiesel. Only 42 persons. Of course, income is more, from 2,800 to 5,300 per month. Income is more, but employment is less. And unit is same, percentage per hectare per year. So even converting this thing to percentage per hectare, biodiesel production, consumption, all stages you want to convert in this also requires expertise. And people are not available in the country. Let me tell you, students are not available. I'm not saying about the experts, they may be early. When PhD students come directly, I've seen many PhD, environment science, environment economics, environment engineering, they cannot do the jobs. When I give, I said, then I have to do that job. Now, concerns and challenges. First concern is environment education and training. Informal, formal, whatever you want to say. We don't have proper education for people. I was doing one interstate WWF and India-Canada Environment Facility. I was leading one project in 7 states of India on environment education. And it was a huge project. When we went to some of the states, teachers were telling that best way for plastic waste, disposal of plastic waste is to bury underground. Plastic waste, bury under the ground. So we could understand what is the level of education our teachers are conveying to the school education. So that was the school education and college education assessment. So we don't have enough trainers, enough educationists who can train their people. Dearth of expert, I already told you, I'll give you examples also how the dearth of expert is there. Both public and private organizations will lead people, but they will not find. So we have to work hard to train the people. And then lack of practical application and lack of awareness. People are not aware also. Our institute rate is very high in terms of students from economics. LSC people have also come, and they have one of the students from LSC I'm guiding at present. So even TERI students have come to our institute for internship. And so what happens is people don't even know. We have very bright students, all India level. Out of 2,000, we take just 20 students. They're quite brilliant. But they come, and most of them either go to economics or they go to some engineering discipline, science discipline. They don't go to they don't want to switch from economics to environment economics or interdisciplinary area. So people are not aware also. So what we need is we have to make them aware. We have to also motivate them that you have, and those who took our motivation, teachers like me, many others are there. They got much better job, much better protection. Like I became professor in 15 years, my student became professor in 7 years, starting from lecture. So that's the difference. Rajat, what is his name? Manish Kathuria, Haripriya. She is my student, and she is professor in IIT, Bombay. So that's the job opportunity you see. So we have to train people. Now see the dearth of expert. You were talking about the air pollution. This is again air pollution. My PhD study I'm taking over, but still I'm very happy that it's still new. I did this in 89, 88, but still it is new. But people have not done it. This is the study which first measured in India, IIT Bombay measured PM 2.5, particulate matter less or equal to 2.5 micrometer diameter. Earlier we used to measure that time only TSP, total suspended particulate. Aerosol is basically total suspended particulate in the air. air or liquid, solid or liquid suspension in air is aerosol. That is the aerosol modeling. Many of the economists, not environmental economists, who are working in the environment area, have calculated. World Bank report, I saw one of the World Bank report, very famous, I will not name, I will not be subjective. They calculated much higher level of respiratory disease and this kind of disease from the air pollution. Because they correlated TSP, total suspended particulate matter, from the incidence of diseases. This is not correct. Even expert I am talking. Because that time we were not measuring, that is one thing, TSP. Second, they were not also having knowledge because they were from other background, sociology background or economics background. They were not knowing, they did not consult the medical experts. They have to consult the medical expert. In fact, less than 10 micrometer diameter only enters your nasal system. But TSP are from 0.00 to something to 100 micrometer in the air, suspended in the air. But everything does not go to your nasal respiratory system. Only particles which are less or equal to 10 micrometer diameter enter your system. This is the figure which is showing. So what you have to do is, first you have to measure those which are less than 10 micrometer. In 10 micrometer also, 90% comes back, respiration, exhale, inhale. So only 0.1 less than 1 micrometer retains in your lungs, which causes the disease. And that is I consulted one of the doctors. She was Dr. Lady, I forgot her name, in the Jawaharlal Nehru School of Environmental Science. And when we consulted, when we were doing this study together, we came hospital and AIMS. That time, I came to know that this is because I'm not medical expert. Second, people think that ground level concentration of air pollution will be higher. No. The second figure, this figure, the third figure below, shows that highest concentration of air pollution is 10 meter. So third, fourth floor, fifth